So let's, of course, what inspired you to come up with this, what I think is a fantastic idea, is Calhoun's Mouse Utopia, yes?
That's right. Well, that's what got me thinking, because when I looked at Calhoun's Mouse Utopia model,
Could you
I
just tell people,
saw
just tell me a quick summary of what went on?
certainly, yeah. What John Calhoun did, John C. Calhoun, was very, very, very
2.5 years ago, we found Dr. John Calhoun knee-deep in mice in the mouse heaven he designed for the National Institute of Mental Health Animal Center near Washington. Dr. Calhoun wanted to find out what would happen to a mouse colony given everything mice need except living space. The result was chilling. 2.5 years ago, more than 2,000 mice were packed into Mouse City. Today, a tiny handful of survivors huddles in one corner of the city. Dr. Calhoun explains what the overcrowding did to Mouse City's inhabitants.
The last 1,000 animals born never learned to develop the social behaviors. They never learned to be aggressive, which is necessary in defense of home sites. They never learned to court. There was no mating. Being no mating, there were no progeny, and the older animals whose behavior was already becoming disrupted, they eventually reached an age too old to reproduce, and so it was all left up to these last 1,000 or so, whom we call the beautiful ones, because not engaging in any stressful activity and only paying attention to themselves, they groomed themselves well, so they looked very fine specimens. But from that point on, which was about the time that you were here 2.5 years ago, this reproduction totally ceased, and the animals have just aged and died.
At least one human group, the Eek tribe, discovered in Africa by Dr. Colin Turnbull, has gone through a similar terrible process, according to Dr. Calhoun.
The two conditions that they went through was that there was a decision on the then colonial government to make a wildlife preserve of this big valley, which was their home with their hunter-gatherers. They were moved up onto the mountainside and gathered together in much higher density. Instead of being spread out in small groups, they were all placed in one place, and also required to engage in an entirely different way of life, in which their social roles, everything they learned how to do had no meaning. Under those conditions, the social behavior broke down entirely. They began living. They still lived together, but their activities were just directed towards themselves. Everything you would think that's human disappeared.
Perhaps the most chilling conclusion from his Mouse City studies, says Dr. Calhoun, is that once this change in social behavior occurs, it apparently cannot be reversed.
It's this fact of apparent irreversible phase shifts that gives some of us a particular concern over the fate of the human situation, because we see worldwide the breaking down of social roles, the increase in contact, both as a result of the breakdown of the social roles and because there are too many people, that this might lead to an overriding of our controls, of our total culture, and would be set into a process which would either fix us rigidly forever into some sort of global tribalism without any adaptation to change, or that would result perhaps eventually some decline, very much like we've seen here, but that postponed somewhat.
Dr. John B. Calhoun, with a very sobering look at a possible future for us. Bill Roberts from the National Institute of Mental Health Animal.
very famous.
Yeah.
60s. He developed this this model to test for the effects of overpopulation and Malthusian traps, essentially, on demographic growth in mice. And he wanted to sort of test all this Paul Ehrlich stuff. Paul Ehrlich wrote this thing called there's a book called The Population Bomb, which was a bestseller at the time. And in the book, he predicted things like by 2003, England would have resorted to cannibalism due to chronic food shortages and things like that. And I was alive then, and I don't remember that. So it turned out the book was largely bogus, and it was based on Malthusianism. So it's based on the idea of this finite world, finite resources. We breed to excess, we become overpopulated, we consume those resources, and then bad stuff starts to happen. So what Colquhoun wanted to do was to sort of fast forward the process in his in using mice as a test subject for this. He wanted to see what happens when you run it in super quick time using mice. He set up these experiments called mouse universes, and the universes were basically these huge habitats which filled entire rooms. And they had multiple layers of nesting sites all stacked on top of each other like high-rise buildings, and ramps going everywhere, and huge amounts of hay on, comfortable hay that they can use for bedding, infinite amounts of hay, basically, infinite amounts of food, infinite amounts of water. There's no possibility they could run out of space, because basically it was a city-like arrangement he'd made.
A utopia for mice.
A utopia for mice, a mouse cornucopia, exactly. Look and see what happened when these mice started to run out of resources. But here's the weird thing. It never got that way. Never happened that way. The mice never ran out of anything. What happened was the mice started procreating, as he would predict, as Paul Ehrlich would predict, right? You get this explosion of growth. So it's growth phase, so I can sort of map it out for you with my finger. Increases like that, increases. So far, Ehrlich's looking good, right? His hypothesis is looking sound. Oh, great. And then it stops. And it starts to plateau like this. It reaches this peak. And then there's no further growth. And at this point, it's worth stating that it's not some kind of equilibrium with their environment. They haven't occupied every nesting box. They haven't used up every bit of straw. They haven't eaten every bit of grain that they've been given. There's tons of food left, tons of space left. And in this plateau phase, the mice are actually starting to do weird and antisocial things. The mice are starting to do things like huddling, crowding together. Despite there being tons and tons of space, they all crowd together. So you find this footage of mice in this plateau phase where they're all huddled together. And they start turning on each other, biting each other, and getting aggressive for no apparent reason. Again,
with their offspring as well. They're killing their offspring.
That's right. They start killing their own offspring, and you get this situation where there's no more growth.
And the beautiful ones. We mentioned
they occur because you have this plateau phase, right, where it got really weird, and by weird I mean interesting, because this is not what the sort of Ehrlich model would have predicted. And then they start to decline. And they drop, and they drop, and they drop. And it's an accelerated decline like that. So it's an increase, flat line, and then a drop-off like that. It's when they get to this point at which they start to drop off, just before that. They get to that point, just before the drop-off, before it starts going from asymptotic to negatively positively accelerated negative growth. You have a situation in which these odd mice get noticed, become conspicuous to the experimenters. And this is about 2 years into the experiment, essentially. And Colquhoun called them the beautiful ones. And I just want to read you his description of them, because it's absolutely stunning. It basically resonates with every single theme that we've just covered. So let me just get the exact quote, because it's definitely worth waiting for this. So let me get this. Here we go. So here is the quote. Okay.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
I'm told I'm not allowed to have dead air. You see, that's.
I won't give you dead air. I'll sing you a little ditty.
I should stop. Maybe I've got an idea. I can start eating an orange. I've got some oranges here. While you find
okay, right. Here we go. Right.
Right.
Emergency over. I have the quote. This is taken from his book published in the 1970s called Death Squared. And he notes on page 86 the following: autistic-like creatures, capable only of the most simple behaviors compatible with physiological survival, emerge out of this process. Their spirit has died. He calls this the first death. They are no longer capable of executing the more complex behaviors compatible with survival. The species in such settings dies. So he has intuited this, you see. He sees that these guys are bad news. As soon as they start appearing, they're heralding, they're portending the doom of the colony.
And they were not interested in fighting. They were not interested in breeding. No, they were effeminate.
They were asexual. They were beautiful ones. He called them beautiful ones because they basically spent all their time grooming.
Yeah.
So they sat in the corner and just groomed and groomed.
Grooming each other and occasionally going and having some water or whatever and then coming back.
That's right. The females would have to pester them for sex.
And they had no interest in it.
Which is incredible.
It sounds a bit like
Japan.
Japan,
modern Japan, exactly.
Which has
sexual herbivory. Yes, absolutely.
No immigration, therefore nothing to interfere with this process.
Yes. The Hikikomori culture, yes, absolutely. So it's a very similar thing, strikingly convergent. But here's the thing. I argued that, or I made a sort of rash dictum type statement, and that is that what if these beautiful ones are doing damage to the colony? And what if they're doing damage to the colony by virtue of carrying mutations, which make them actually withdraw from social life, essentially? And that act of withdrawing from the social life of the colony compromises the fitness of the colony in some way. And by the way, we've worked out right down to the molecule what's going on, because we've actually got beautiful ones in the lab, and we've shown how they can contaminate wild-type non-mutant mice with their mutant phenotype. And
it was that their system is urine, wasn't it?
That's right. Well, we'll get onto that in a moment. But first, the context of the beautiful ones, because what's happening with the beautiful ones is this wasn't noted by Colquhoun, but the prediction I made was that they are doing something. They're not benign, right? They're not just minding their own business, grooming, licking themselves, having a good time, being MGTOW mice, right? Mice going their own way. They're doing something else. There's something insidious happening there. They carry some variants that are bad news. And the reason why those variants are there in those numbers is because you already have now enough of a sort of social epistasis load, right? You have enough of a load of these spiteful mutations that it's starting to really screw over the colony. And there's no surprise, therefore, that as soon as they start appearing in large numbers, the colony starts collapsing. So the question is, what's going on? Well, these autistic-like mice, as they're described, his words, not mine, they seem to be socially averse, sexually averse, but critically, there are certain functions that mice have to actually engage in order to maintain the sort of corporate fitness of their colonies. They have to cooperate with each other in nesting and rearing, right? They're very social. They're very social creatures. They do things like collective territory marking. So they will go around marking territory, and then based on markers left down by the other mice, they signal other mice not to remark that territory, and they'll collectively map out the entire territory, right? And this actually affects how they encode spatially. This has effects on where these urine markers are affect spatial encoding. So they can solve these complex problems. They can cooperate with each other in all sorts of elaborate ways. If you start introducing mutants into the mix, it can damage that cooperativity. And we did this. We actually did this. I have a colleague of mine, a very, very brilliant experimental geneticist who works on mice, works on the social ecology of mice.
Yep.
And I proposed to him.
Okay. You've frozen.
Frozen.
Yeah. You proposed to him what?
Okay, right. You got that far? So
yeah.
Stefan Baldwin of behavior in mice. And he had collected some data in which he found evidence that if you reared wild-type mice, that is to say mice that do not carry mutations, with mice which carry a very specific mutation called NLGN3. These are knockouts for a gene called NLGN3. It's neuroligin 3. These genes are expressed in different parts of the mouse's body, but most prominently they're in the parvibellum intraneuron expression region. So they express in the brain quite strongly in these specific regions of the brain. The mutant, they have autistic-like behavior. They're actually used as a model in mouse studies for the study of autism. So we think that these NLGN3 mutants are the beautiful ones, right? Calhoun in the 1960s did not have a molecular assay of this. We do. We can make artificial beautiful ones by knocking out NLGN3. And what we found, what Stefan and his crew, a very capable research students, found, is a paper Kolbasti et al. Published in the journal. They found was that they simply being around, simply being in the presence of these artificial, these NLGN knockout mice, was enough to reduce the testosterone of the wild-type mice, reduce their ability to form stable and enduring social hierarchies. It increased the amount of variance in terms of behaviors among the mice in ways which are clearly suboptimal for the functioning of the colony. It induced all sorts of problems. It induced anxiety in these mice. It did all sorts of things. We reckon the sperm counts would have been suppressed. So simply being around these mutants, it was almost like these mutants were cooties, right? The cooties were coming off of these NLGN3 mutants, these knockouts, and infecting the other mice.